Hi, everyone, and welcome back to The Wheelchair Activist. This is a podcast hosted by me, Emma Vogelman, where I talk to some amazing disabled people and some amazing allies of the disabled community. Today, I'm talking to Zoe Portlock. Zoe is the Senior Accessibility User Experience Designer at a massive FTSE 100 company. If you don't know what that is, don't worry, you soon will. I'm not 100% clear on it either, but I do know that I'm very excited to be talking to Zoe today about all things accessibility related.
Unapologetically, ruthlessly advocate constantly. Often people haven't heard of many sides of the things we deal with day to day until someone is in front of them telling them their lived experience. I now have several millions in budget. I have a director sponsor. I'm getting a team very soon. We changed the font, the entire brand's font, because it wasn't very accessible. I've done all kinds of stuff. We redid a lot of the brand foundations to really center around accessibility. I just want every piece of our content to be equally consumable by anyone that could read it, and it might seem like a small number of people, but it's really, really not.
Zoe, thank you so much for joining us on The Wheelchair Activist.
Thank you for having me.
No, my pleasure. It's you've been someone on my radar for a while to have on, but I think it's also very important to acknowledge that our first sort of interaction was you auditing my website for accessibility. So I am super grateful for you doing that. And yeah, can you tell our wonderful listeners a little bit about you and what you do?
Absolutely. Hi, I'm Zoe Portlock. I'm both a disabled person and an accessibility expert lead. So I have a range of my own needs going on. I'm very neurodiverse. I tick a lot of the boxes. So I'm autistic, dyslexic, dyspraxic, and have Erlin syndrome. So I have my glasses tinted purple and all of my screens are purple. So I tick a lot of those boxes, very neurodiverse. And I also have a range of chronic illnesses too. So I have fibromyalgia, ME/CFS, hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. I have chronic migraine from a head injury in 2015. So a lot to balance and juggle. But I think that it's really valuable in what I do. So I lead digital accessibility at a FTSE 100 financial services company. I essentially began that movement that's led into a discipline, a team and department, essentially. So it was just a very keen, I think we could be doing this better. And I was given the agency to run with that and build what I wished. And now it's very much built into the brand. It's a big part of everything that goes out. And I love getting to talk about it and how those two things cross over together too. And like you said, I did your website audit. Occasionally I take on some freelance work. So I've written a bunch of articles for Scope's The Big Hack. Thanks for commissioning that last one. And I'm a bit active on Twitter and saw you were tweeting about a new website and launching a podcast. So just offered to have a look and give you some recommendations. It's really nice to be on the other side of that now, at the behind the scenes.
No, I mean, it was so important to me, as everyone knows, that this podcast and my content and everything that I do is as accessible as possible. And so it was so important to me that before I properly launched that I did get it accessibility checked, because it's not something that I am by any means an expert in, but I know little drips and drops. And so when I heard from you that you could do that service for me, I was just so excited that you were able to do it. And I really want to explore the world of finance with you and disability, because it's not something that I've really had on the podcast before. And I think when you think about finance and sort of when you toss around terms like the FTSE 100, which I'm not going to lie, I only have a vague understanding of what that is. But I think, it conjures up images of like Wolf of Wall Street and, sort of like that type of industry where it moves so fast that how can disability be factored into that? But what would you say is sort of the reality? I mean, you said that you got a lot of sort of agency to build accessibility into where you work and to really run with that. But what would you say is the reality of disability in the financial sector?
Good question. Big question. I will quickly, the FTSE 100 thing. So it's the Financial Times Stock Exchange 100 index. So it's basically like the core 100. Keep an eye on these. It's like a bit of a financial term, but tends to be known wider. Apologies. Basically, one of the UK's biggest investment platforms, I will say. Quite a big player. So I worked in finance briefly as a contractor. I worked for Lloyds Bank, and that was supposed to be in an accessibility role, which I was so excited about. But as a contractor, you kind of do what they give you, and I was put on to like business as usual campaigns and websites and such. So I missed out then. And from that, I had this determination that I will get to do this one day. I am going to do accessibility one day. And in the finance world, so some big organizations are great at it. They have been on it for a very, very long time and have made it a priority. But just like many, many other places out there, accessibility cannot have made it into a priority, not by any like negative way, not intentionally. It's just that you might not have had someone who conveniently is autistic and their special interest is digital accessibility and will burst in the door and be like, let me do this. I want to do this. So yeah, I was able to kind of pick that up and run with it. It's not as intensive as it might seem as an industry, I'd say. I will say that, especially in this role and other places I've worked, often you kind of become the internal accessibility consultant as well. When I joined this company, no one in HR had heard of Access to Work, which is a government, for those listening at home, a government grant scheme for adjustments that you need as a disabled person to get to and keep you in the workplace. So there has been a lot of teaching both in how to be accessible for your colleagues as well as your customers. But yes, it's not quite as harsh as it seems. The reason I like working in banking in that realm is because there is investment into digital services. I'd worked for smaller companies and they would have one person running like 3 different specialties. So if you're in a smaller organization, you're doing a bit of everything. Whereas when you're in a bank, their digital teams, they really invest in it. And when I first worked at Lloyds, I found out about user experience designers, like a role that I never heard of, was fascinated by. And 4 years down the line, that is essentially my role. I'm a accessibility specific user experience designer who also leads accessibility. So there's something in that, it's the depth of specialty you get to own and run with and train in is something special, I find. And it's definitely a big part of why I came back to financial services, to be able to do this and not worry about handling other responsibilities, but really devote myself to accessibility. And I think it's been a good fit for sure.
I think that there is a real benefit to working for larger and sometimes more profitable organizations, I think, when it comes to accessibility and inclusion, because they are able to like you say, they're able to invest in it. And, as difficult as that is, and, if you work for a smaller organization, to not have the same resources, I think it's really something to bear in mind. I think a lot of people might assume that a big company wouldn't be at all interested in disability or accessibility, because why should they? And we can get on to the value of the purple pound and all of that good stuff. But I think if you're thinking about it from an employment perspective, when you work for a large organization, they're able to put more money behind supporting you as an employee, and then also their outward services towards disabled people. I mean, I think that's really encouraging to hear that you've been given those opportunities and that you are in the role now. And yeah, it's so interesting that you're doing sort of the external and the internal stuff. So I suppose before we get into all of the rest of what I want to talk to you about, I think one thing I'm super interested to ask you, and I ask most of my guests this, but it's, what does disability mean to you?
What a question. Very big question. I've thought about this, and I think for me, it's about making your own path in a society that wasn't built for you, creating your own normal, finding your community, and building your own life that is adapted and is designed to meet your needs. Not necessarily a cookie cutter fit, but once you do build that, it's so special. So finding your community, wherever or whatever part of that community is. I mean, I have a lot going on. So like neurodiversity specifically, learning about the real lived experience of autism, separating it from that clinical life of desperately waiting for a referral to understand yourself and know where to go with what you're dealing with day to day. Just building your own normal, really lifting up other disabled people where you can, making the world a bit kinder for other disabled people in your organization that you're working with, or trying to speak out and have a bit of a platform, or just unapologetically, ruthlessly advocate constantly. Often people haven't heard of many sides of the things we deal with day to day until someone is in front of them telling them their lived experience. And for me, that's a big part of it. It's just getting to do that every day and building a life that is right for me, and year by year learning exactly how to make that better and better and better. Yeah.
I really love that. I love how you started that by creating a path, creating a new normal. Creating your normal, because I think that's such a positive way to think about it, but it makes so much sense. I think so much of the time quite rightly in a way, we focus on the barriers and sort of, following the social model of disability. We know that is what disables us, but I really loved the positivity in you saying, like, figuring out what works for you, figuring out what life you want and how to go about living that. And I think, talking about lived experiences and sharing that, I, sort of briefly alluded to this before we started recording, but that's one of the things that I love the most about doing this podcast and learning about different people and different disabilities, because I, will be really honest, I didn't know that your purple tinted glasses were because of an impairment. I thought, she is just rocking that Y2K look, and I love it. I genuinely do. But now I know about that as a way to manage that impairment, or to make things more, accessible to you. So I think that's so valuable. I mean, thank you for teaching me that.
No problem. It is a niche one. It's not very known or that commonly discussed like other realms of neurodiversity. it was a journey in itself, honestly, finding out about how I process light. So I wasn't diagnosed with dyslexia until my A levels. And once I had some help at university for the first time, which was just world changing, I had a dyslexia coach who really somehow dragged me through that degree. Incredibly grateful for her. She also was an Erlin representative and was kind of picking up on a few things from me and pushed me to encourage me to go get a screening and look into it. And I'll never forget the first day that I put on the right shade of tinted lenses. It's a fascinating process. So it's about how you process light, really. Can really impact your coordination. Obviously, your ability to read, that's pretty standard in the dyslexia realm. The way I kind of explain it is how some dyslexic people find it helpful to read off tinted paper. And Erlin syndrome is kind of like that, but on a lot of steroids. So it's not just paper, it's everything, really. If I can block out that glare, that visual stress, it just makes everything so much easier. And now that I have my right tint, and like this color is actually a makeup of like 4 different, slightly different colors on top of each other. It's so fascinating. They bring a big briefcase full of all of these different color lenses and they'd all have the slightest difference. And in the assessment, you sit there and they're like, okay, hold these up to your eyes. We're going to read in artificial light. We're going to read in natural light. Look at the sun. How long does your eyes take to process? Look at that shadow down there under that desk. Can you tell me what's there? Or like walk around and see how it feels. And it's one of the most exhausting things I do every 2 years is have that assessment. But I will always remember in my second year university house where I got the right lenses and I put them on and my assessor was like, walk around, see how they feel, you know? And for the first time in my life, I actually understood the depth of a staircase. So I always knew that I had to move my legs in a certain way to get up to a second floor of a building, but I never really understood why or like where my foot needed to go. But once I had just like the sheer reduction in visual stress, like I was able to really understand depth of my surroundings and I could really get it. And Erlin was a massive life changer, that one for sure. But I'll never forget that. Just it was really baffling. But it is a niche one that people don't know about a lot. And I do get a lot of people thinking it's a aesthetic choice. And honestly, I would wear them as an aesthetic choice because I love pink and I love purple. And I've only recently realized that that's probably because it's the least painful color for me to look at. So naturally, I surround myself in it.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, of course.
Which makes sense when you piece it all together. My glasses are kind of a distinctive feature. And honestly, I used to really dislike them because for a few years after my head injury, my migraine was so severe. And that intertwines with Erlin and the light you want to reduce. So my glasses used to be like a really dark, I'd have a pink color for environments where I could control my lighting so that I could read and such. But most of the time I wore these really dark gray lenses. And to me, they look like sunglasses. And turns out I'm autistic. So I was always very hyper aware of how people were perceiving them. And I had this rule in my head that wearing sunglasses inside is rude, you know? So I'd always feel like I'm wearing these and people are going to think that I don't want to be here or I'm hungover or something like that. But really, my brain just can't process light very well. So I'm a lot happier with them these days. But that in part is because I feel like it doesn't look like I'm wearing sunglasses and I don't feel like I'm being as rude unintentionally.
I think that's so interesting, though. And I feel really, I don't know exactly how to describe it, but it makes me feel a bit sad in a way that you thought, people would be judging you. But I fully understand why you thought that, but that, those were the glasses that you needed at that time to be able to, just get about your daily life. And for anyone to sort of think badly of you because that, it's so difficult, isn't it? Because if you do need to go off or have a quiet moment, or sometimes for me, if I need to, leave a video call in the middle of it because I need to go and do something medical, people can perceive things in different ways. And you really don't want it to come across that way, but you equally don't want to tell everyone all of your medical history all of the time.
Yeah, definitely. It's a balance, and these days I've somehow managed to turn all of this into a career where I get to just talk about it all, and that is helpful for people somehow. So I'm running with it. And I do explain why they're purple and why when I share my screen, it's definitely purple to other people. And some days I'll be more unapologetic about that than others. Some days I'll turn the tint down really low just so that people don't ask, so that I don't have to explain it, because it's not a quick one. It's not a quick one, Erlin syndrome. So some days I'll have it on really low, and then immediately as soon as I hang up, the tint will whack straight back up and it will be a really intense purple, and my whole brain just goes, ah. But I'm learning to just embrace it in that way. Making this job for myself has helped for sure. That it's good, and I use a crutch every day as well, and that introducing using a walking aid isn't a small task or decision for people to make. And whilst I'm not in the office anymore, people don't see that day to day. They only really see the purple glasses. But it's different when you're in your own environment as well, isn't it? I'm so much happier working from home.
Oh my God,
I love it so much. I've got my cats with me and my wife bringing me lovely drinks. Like I'm so fortunate. And I don't know how I ever coped with an office environment, honestly.
Isn't that interesting though? And I have had the exact same thought so many times about how much easier it is at home. And it's something that I've talked to a lot of other disabled people about, and sort of having your own setup exactly how you want it at home is really invaluable. But I think it's interesting because at the beginning of the pandemic, I know I was just dying to get back into the workplace, dying to get back into the office and have that socialization, which, I mean, don't get me wrong, I do still miss to an extent, but I think it doesn't, for me, outweigh the benefits that working from home gives. And it sounds like you have an amazing setup at home, but
I'm very fortunate in that it works for me. I mean, at the beginning, I remember there was a day or so where they said, okay, vulnerable people, you're staying inside for 12 weeks, and no one else was included in that. And I remember going to the office after hours and picking up my laptop and things that I need to work at home. So like I had a document type on a specific adapter keyboard and those bits. So I went and collected them, and I'll always remember just how like sad it was, because I just felt like I would be the only one working from home and everyone else would be roaming free, coming into the office, doing all their things. And then a day and a half later, no, everyone had to get home and stay home, which changed it a bit, being in it all together. But as we got used to that, I've really found it so valuable. I don't know if I'd be able to have got this job or like be able to lead this to the passion I have for it and the determination and just how much I give myself to it. I don't think I could have done that in an office, because so much of my energy just went to sitting upright in a chair and being prepared for someone to just speak to you at any point and all of these things. Whereas now, like, my environment, I have a chest full of 1,000 different fidget toys next to my desk, and like there's just so much to touch and play with all around me, and I don't have to worry about the click clacking of anything or how I'm stimming or any of it. It's been so freeing. But I'm really lucky. I know that that's not everyone's circumstances, but for me, knowing that my bed is the other side of the wall behind me. I don't have to, when I'm crashing out in terms of ME and fatigue, I don't have to know when I need to get up and go to the medical room, which is also a prayer room and a breastfeeding room. So by the time you get down there, you don't even know if it's going to be available. I don't have to worry about navigating down to that room that might be available anymore. My own bed is meters from me. And that just stripped back so many layers, of just being aware of your surroundings and how you're doing, and if you're going to be able to hold your own head up for much longer, like all of those thoughts that took up a lot of my work days when I had to work in an office from home. For me, it's been world changing, honestly. And who doesn't like to present without their notes directly in front of them? I used to have to I sat down when I present before, and I'd be like swaying back and forth on the chair just because I needed that motion. And now I just don't even have to explain why I'm not standing up to present, just little things like that.
Now it'd be weird if you did.
I don't know how I would. I can't imagine it anymore. It's very convenient. It works for me, and I'm grateful for that.
I have to say, what a strange combination of uses that room in your office had: breastfeeding, prayer room, and a medical room.
Yes.
What an interesting combination.
Yeah, it's a pretty big building. They've changed it since, to their credit. They've recently broken them out into be more things, but there's a mixture of I'm actively having a migraine and my vision is strobing, but someone is knocking on the door and needs it for their prayer space. And I respect that so much, and I want to give that to them. But also, I can't open one of my eyes and I'm trying to find where the door handle is. It wasn't easiest, and this is embarrassing. In a previous workplace, there wasn't any medical room or anything like that. And when I had a migraine, I used to have to lie down under the table in the boardroom because it was the darkest place in the office, which sounds so tragic. And it was.
No, it's sad because that was what you had to do to manage, but that does make me sad. And I can just imagine if just your CEO accidentally strolled in at that moment, how you would start explaining that and just go, no, I'm not, slacking off or something. It's actually because I really need to be here.
Yeah, I check the availability on Outlook and book it, and then just go and be in a dark place, going through a medication cycle. Oh yes, those years. It all feels like a very long time ago now. But yeah, I think working from home is good for me.
Definitely.
And
I wanted to go back to what you said about how you've sort of made this career for yourself, and sort of your career now focuses around disability, and it focuses a lot around some of the disabilities and impairments and conditions that you have. But it sounds like, and correct me if I'm wrong, but most of your diagnoses were later in life. So what was that journey from? What is it that you wanted to do as a career, and how did you end up here?
Okay. Yeah. So it did all come later in life. I've listened to the first season, and everyone talks about, their role models as children and their experience as children. And I was, none of this really either kicked off in terms of chronic illness or was picked up until 17. And then everything kind of all happened at once. Rough time. But I'm on the other side now. Basically, I think in the past, I knew media was a realm that fascinated me. I can spend hours doing a deep dive and preparing this info dump for my wife. I'll go deep into a topic, and then after we've had dinner, I'll just show her everything. So I have this capacity for media, something around media, especially sociology around the media. I knew something that was my most significant interest. I didn't know what it was going to turn out like. I didn't know what I'd end up doing. And during university, I worked for giffgaff. So I used to do a lot of video content for them and community manager stuff. So I don't know if it's still the case, but until recently, if you ran out of data on giffgaff and you got a text about it, there would be a link, and that link would be my face telling you how to add more data to your plan.
Oh my gosh. If someone remembers that, please put it in the comment of this episode.
Yeah. There's all kinds of tutorial videos, phone reviews, all kinds of stuff around for giffgaff stuff. I hopefully it's not still used, but I did all kinds of stuff. So that was community management. And I found that really fascinating as a way that people engage online, but under like a specific purpose. I did a research project and a dissertation on giffgaff's business model. And again, it's sociology of the media. So I was interested in that kind of realm. I knew I wanted to do something like niche so that I could just like really get into it. And I found that now and I'm happy. But I kind of fell from that into website work because after a while, recording the same script, editing yourself, it doesn't do much for me. It wasn't the best use of my time. How often I had to look at my own face. So I moved into more website work and then did that for a while. Fun fact, I built the website for the Dyson hairdryer. That was a contract. Yeah, we were in a team and we made a bunch of different versions of different markets because they launched like 40 different territories or countries on the same day for the first time. So we had to remake the website for those versions and make sure it was all, because there's different characters. Some languages are much longer or shorter or completely different characters, and you had to adjust the design to fit that. So yeah, that was a brief contract that I did. So I fell into website work, and a lot of that was contracting, and contracting was not good for me. So you have a day rate, and you turn up and you do the thing, and there's just this culture with it of trying to bank hours, pushing myself way too hard, and kind of like competing with myself on how much I could get done in the time. And there's this,
we've all been there.
Yeah, obviously there's no sick pay or annual leave, so you have to make a very conscious decision to forfeit income for any respite, anything like that. It wasn't ideal. So a big goal was to just end up in a permanent position somewhere where I didn't feel like I needed to prove myself so intensely every day. And I found that with my current employer, and I think I'm making it worth it. I'd like to think that I'm a good hire. I very much appreciate annual leave, and yeah, it's nice to stay in one place because contracting is not compatible when you're chronically ill. It's just not. And yeah, naturally, I did Lloyd's, like I said. That was going to be accessibility specific website work, but didn't end up being accessibility specific. Continued in website work and then ended up at my current place. And in the interview, I mentioned accessibility, and they were like, "Oh, we like that. Let's hear more about that." And yeah, brought me in and just gave me this support and agency to go and do my thing. And 3 years down the line, I now have several millions in budget. I have a director sponsor. I'm getting a team very soon. We changed the font, the entire brand's font, because it wasn't very accessible. I've done all kinds of stuff. We redid a lot of the brand foundations to really center around accessibility. All of it really, and just optimize it all and make it as useful as possible. And they've all been so respectful around that and welcoming. I face very little challenge, which is a miracle in a big organization. But yeah, I bring a lot of myself to it, and maybe that helps. I'm not sure, but it works. And I just believe that everyone should be able to check their pension. Really, like that's my ultimate goal every day. Is that when you work for a company, you don't choose who provides your pension. You go along with it, and that means you should, regardless of your circumstances, like you didn't choose to engage with this company. You're just working, and you want to save up so that you can retire one day. And everyone should be able to check in with their pension. And that's my like main drive every day and how I talk about it. It's just like,
yeah, but
everyone deserves that.
that's so perfectly put, though, because I think when we talk about accessibility, and in particularly digital accessibility, I think a lot of people don't understand that these are very basic daily interactions that you have online that some people are just completely shut out from doing because of something that could be changed. And, my content lead hat on is saying, oh my God, remind me to ask you to write an article about your company changing their font to be more accessible because, as you know, I work with businesses to become more accessible and inclusive for disabled people, and branding comes up so much in that, oh, well, this is our brand color, this is our brand font, and it's, even though it's inaccessible, we can't change it because it's the core branding. And I think, well, first of all, maybe you should have checked before you designed it that way. But also, is it going to be the end of the world if you use a slightly different color or a slightly different font? But for branding and marketing and creative teams, it seems to be the end of their world. But I just think that that's so incredible that your company has done something so, I don't know whether to say big or small, because it's kind of both.
Yeah, I see that. So the way I approach it, like, if you weren't aware of these things before, you just didn't have the lived experience and you didn't know, and that's okay. But let's work together to improve it, ultimately. So that's the kind of approach I take, like, yeah, this rebrand was done and there wasn't really any guidance about the combinations of colors and how the combinations are used, because that's more about like color contrast. And once you're aware of it, you see it absolutely everywhere. But there wasn't guidelines around that specifically because the agency that did the rebrand, they didn't know of or value accessibility. So when I came in, it's not even a case of let's change this color slightly so it's more accessible. Really, it's just let's change how we use it slightly. There was this one combination which became quite core to the brand. From It was white and this other color that really, so real quick, if I simplify it majorly, you can quantify a ratio from a color combination, and then that has a pass and fail level, right? And this beloved combination was far below. So the bar is like 4.5 to 1. And this combination is like 1.17 to 1. So it did not pass, and it was not near passing, but instead of saying, let's not use this color, we were given the space to really reapproach the branding for the better. And now it's like, okay, instead of this beloved color in white, let's just use this beloved color in navy. Because then the contrast ratio is like 9 point something. It's brilliant. But, there's change and there's socialization and ways of doing stuff historically. People want to make things that look aesthetically beautiful to them, especially if that's the way they've always been able to do it. I get that. I really do. I just want every piece of our content to be equally consumable by anyone that could read it, and it might seem like a small number of people, but it's really, really not. And you mentioned like the purple pound earlier. Like, I spend my days like promoting and justifying and going through this business case that I could reel off in my sleep, but with the same amount of passion. It's a lot to navigate, but hats off to my employer. They really have just listened, honestly, and I couldn't ask for more than that. The font is fascinating. The font we changed to is very similar, but just significantly more readable. They put out some comms and had a lot of feedback about the font just not being readable, and we went to Digital Accessibility Centre, DAC, in Wales. They are brilliant. did some focus groups with them around the font we currently use and the potential fonts we could switch to using, and really valued those voices and got them out there, both of real clients and people with access needs.
Yeah.
And it's still it's like you said, it sounds so big, but it's also so small. But the weight of that, to be able to say that we changed the whole font, is significant. It's just unfortunate that the original one was so thin. I had people contact me saying, why aren't you printing your materials with black ink? You're a financial services company. You have the money. Like, you don't need to save money in this way by using grey ink.
Oh my God, that's funny.
It wasn't that though. Like, it was printed in black, but the font was so thin that it looked grey. And you can't explain that to people, but yeah, props. We took that on board and changed everything. But that's the kind of perspective, and I want to bridge that in between people just like, I just want to read this content. Like, I just want to know what shares to pay attention to that are coming up. I want to read this news article. But yeah, the font was so thin that they thought we didn't print it in black, bridging that gap and telling those stories. Unfortunate to do it, for sure.
I love that the people thought that a huge financial institution couldn't possibly afford ink.
Yeah.
But I think for people who might be thinking about like color contrast, and I mean, for me, it was like very barely, but kind of in the world of accessibility. I just sort of want to contextualize it for people who don't really know much about it in terms of color contrast. And I suppose the way that I think about it is, if you are on a website and there is a background color, maybe like a teal, like a pale teal, and then they have white font, like, I think everyone can think, oh, that's quite difficult to read. Mm-hmm. And so that's what I think we mean by a very poor color contrast, where the text is not different enough from the background color, then that makes it difficult to read. And there are accessibility standards, which, as you say, have a ratio of what that difference needs to be. And sort of the standard, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the easiest I'm imagining is black and white, because they're so different. But I know a lot of companies also tend to use red, white, and blue for their color, sort of their brand colors. But if you look at those three colors, they're also very different. So if you think of certain supermarkets, I'm going to say Tesco, for example. I've had Jason from Tesco on the podcast, so I think it's fair to say that I like Tesco, but their colors are red, white, and blue. So their printed materials or their visual materials that use those colors pass a good accessibility standard because those colors are different. So I just wanted to give a little bit of like context for people who are thinking, well, what does that look like? And, I think, like I said, everyone can remember an example of where they're on possibly an artsy or really aesthetic website, and it's actually really difficult to read, and you end up just giving up, which brings me to the purple pound and the click away pound. And I want to get your thoughts on it, but for the people who don't know what it is, I'm sure we've talked about the purple pound on this podcast, but for people who don't know what that is, it is the spending potential of disabled people and families with a disabled person in their household in the UK. And it's some astronomically high figure. I can't remember it off the top of my head, but you probably do.
So I've actually presented on this earlier today. I did a presentation to Bristol Quality Network, lots of different charities and local organisations, and I mentioned the purple pound and also some statistics from the clickaway pound. So that big figure, the potential or the spending power, is how they phrase it, of disabled households in the UK per annum is £279 billion. It's a lot of money.
If anyone's thinking, did she say billion, not million? Yes, you did say billion. And that's so, it's bonkers to me, but it makes so much sense. But I really want to get you to explain the click-away pound. Okay. If you don't mind, I realize I'm putting it to work here.
No, I love the click-away pound. It's one of the first resources I found way back when. It is a very big survey of many different disabled peoples with various access needs, digital experiences online. And they've done it 2 years. They've done like 2 separate rounds and have compared it all. But there are some insights that come from that. It just gives such a voice. Like there's 2 that I quote constantly, which is all around loyalty, and the loyalty of a disabled user. Once they find something that works for them, they are not going to deviate. They're not going to try something else for fun. Like that's something working for us, or being able to engage with something isn't a guaranteed experience. Once you know it works for you, like I could talk about this for a whole other hour. Like I could start a podcast on Oxo Good Grips as a range. I
think you should do, but carry on.
I love Oxo Good Grips. And if there is a reason for me to buy something from that range, I'm going to do it. But loyalty, that's the point of it. So 81% of people, disabled users, people with access needs, will prioritize a more accessible service over competitive pricing, because it works for us and we know that. And you kind of give up the privilege of getting to shop around and get the best deal just for being able to do something. That's huge. That's a lot of loyalty, regardless of what can be considered one of the most important factors that you're looking for when you're making a decision. And then the other one is 86% would spend more if there were fewer access barriers. That one as well. Like we want to engage with you. We have the funds. We want to do this, but we can't because there's unnecessary barriers. Like I can't navigate the form that lets me put in my card details. Therefore, I can't pay for the basket that I've spent ages putting together. All of these things. There's 1,000 other very interesting statistics from that. The click-away pound, very recommend that you look up. It was one of the first things that lit this fire. You can tell I'm getting excited about it, like talking at 1,000 miles an hour. But that's what it's like when you get on a call to me about accessibility.
I'm just as impassioned about this as you are, and it really came up when I started working at Scope in consumer affairs policy, because I knew as a disabled person myself that I was this type of consumer. I mean, it's something that, there's the expression, if you have to ask the price, you can't afford it. But I think for disabled people, as you just so perfectly put, we will spend more if it means that, we are faced with less barriers, and that we're more loyal to brands or to companies that make a good experience for us. And I am completely guilty of that. I will go back to a company if I know that they're accessible. And, I think that another way to think of it is if you're going out somewhere to eat, and as a wheelchair user, I might go on their website and see if they have any access information on the website. And if they don't have it, I'm going to assume that they haven't thought about it and that they probably aren't accessible. And I'm less likely to spend my time calling them to find out. And when I say step free and they sort of say, oh, we are, but there's one step to get up to the toilet. You're like, okay, not step free then. That's cool. So if I know a restaurant that is step free, but they have had it on their website, I'm going to keep going back there because that's a much easier and less time consuming experience for me. And I think that it's just so fascinating that businesses aren't more aware and acting on this more, because to make a decision, like we were talking about with color contrast or with font, is something so simple, but can tap into that huge spending power of disabled people and their families. Why would you not do it?
Yeah, that's how I approach it. Like, why would you not? If you there are definitely some myths around accessibility that, accessible content is boring or hard to brand it or restrictive. And really, I find that it's not. You just need to have a little more awareness, or like some resources that help encourage certain usages of color, for example. But even if that's the case, do you not want your audience to read your content? It just, I feel like it only improves what you put out. I mean, I'm biased. I live for this stuff. Like, I love it. So I'm not exactly subjective on this, but why wouldn't you want to make something more fit for purpose, accessible to more people, usable, all of this? One thing that came up when you were talking then is how intensely I believe that disabled people also deserve the choice of choosing what avenue or method they engage with the company in. I don't want to have to phone you if I don't like phone calls. If I want to do it on an app, I want to do it on the app,
Yeah, it's having those same avenues as everyone else. I mean, when you were talking just then about phone calls, I mean, the first thing I thought was, who in our generation likes making phone calls?
Right.
But from an access perspective, if that is difficult or daunting for you, then you're really going to be put off going to that company or that service provider, whatever it might be, and therefore giving them your money.
Yeah, definitely. I also find like when you look at digital accessibility, quite naturally, you end up looking at the end-to-end process, because you can't just make an accessible app and be like, there, I've done it. We're good now. First of all, it never truly ends. It's involving like a continuous thing to manage. I love managing it, but anyway, I forgot what I was saying.
About digital accessibility and how it's a constant process. It's never fully done. But when you think that you've made an app or you've made a website or something and say, oh, it's accessible, that's the end of it.
Yes, sorry, it's the bigger, the one before that. This is one of, I think it's gone.
Don't worry about it.
Sorry, apologies. This also happens when I get so into things. The wider picture can just leave.
Absolutely fine. But what I wanted to come back to is, so if someone is listening to this and they're thinking, oh, did you remember it?
I did remember it.
Okay, go for it.
Cool. Thank you so much. End-to-end processes. So you can make an accessible app, but if one of the ways you complete a journey or a process is to, I don't know, send a letter or to phone somewhere, if your customer service staff don't know about things like relay services, where you could have an interpreter, just to define, where someone who needs it will use an interpreter who will speak to the agent on the phone. So often this could be someone who is deaf or any of those related needs and can't do the phone call directly for any reason. If you don't have staff that know what that is, sometimes that interpreter is electronic voice. It's not just a human voice. So if you pick up a phone and someone's trying to log on, like access their account, and it sounds like a scam, if your staff don't know about this service and why it exists, if you rely on that service and you need to phone them, that's a major barrier. So it's holistic. It can't just be the app, it's a much bigger picture. And I think it will keep me busy for many years, but I like that. But it's very much end to end. Like you can't just do one bit. It's got to be the whole piece, because who doesn't only use one specific part of a company's services? It's a bigger picture. It's always about that end to end journey.
That makes so much sense now that you say it. And, to my lack of knowledge, I didn't fully understand what a relay service was. But now when you've described it, I've talked about it a little bit on the podcast, but not properly, like not fully. But I spent a year after I contracted the swine flu when I wasn't able to speak. And I am now thinking, man, I wish I knew that service was a thing. Maybe it wasn't back in 2009. But if it was, that would have been pretty helpful. And that's, it's a type of restriction, limitation, whatever you want to call it, that isn't restricted to the deaf or hard of hearing community. So, again, this is something that we could really bang on and on about, but accessibility measures benefit so many more people than you think, so many more people than the impairment or disability that you think it's for. So please do it. And I want to ask you, for anyone who's listening to this that may be now looking at the company that they work for and wondering about their accessibility, because they've heard a lot about color contrast and font and now communication methods, what is something that you would advise them to do to maybe act on something?
Love that. I would say it does kind of depend on the size of your organization and where you work in that organization. But there are many ways to start. So, if you work in operations, you can make sure that the process for organizing alternative formats of investment reports or paperwork is streamlined, but is also known widely and has a good range of different options. In my company, it's not just audio file or large print. It's also different pastel tinted paper, because I really wanted that to be an option and I really pushed for it. That you could do that within operations. If you work in internal comms, like read up on quick wins, accessibility features within Outlook and PowerPoint and transcripts and captions, and the difference between subtitles, which is just the audio, and closed captioning, which is all sounds. In where you sit, there are so many things online. I've never had any formal training. Everything I learned was from Googling, reading articles, watching YouTube videos, understanding, having some fun and just trying to navigate around the website using a keyboard exclusively. And learn about things like skip links and just find pockets of opportunities and just Google it, like dive deep in, find other people in your organization that have that interest. Once you do that, you can bond together and you can achieve some things, let me tell you. I would say look around you at the role you're doing, look for opportunities, always be advocating and looking out for thinking about different demographics and if this is actually a suitable route for them or how you could support them better. The developers that I've trained up as accessibility ambassadors, we found some e-learning for them and empowered them to spread that knowledge further. Depending on the budget you have access to, you could train up a few people, and that can be, again, just giving them time to Google and read and watch and play and download a screen reader and and reach out to organizations that amplify disabled voices for testing. There are so many things you can do, and you don't need necessarily budget to do it. I didn't have budget for 3 years. Like you can do it. It's all there. The biggest thing is explaining why you need the time to do it. And once you've got that time, the business case almost writes itself. Honestly, connect with other people in your company. Someone looks after customer feedback that comes in, or the complaints. You want to look for themes in those complaints and get them on board and build a team, even if it's just an informal working group. Just find other people that care about it and want to investigate and work on it, I'd say. And Google is everything.
Well, thank you so much, Zoe, for coming on the podcast and talking to us about accessibility and about you teaching me about your various conditions, because I've certainly learned so much. And yeah, I'm so thrilled that we've been able to have a proper conversation after months of like digital communication. So yeah, thank you so much.
It's been awesome. Yeah, thank you so much for having me. So thrilled to be here. And I'm sure we'll keep working together in the future.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of The Wheelchair Activist with the amazing Zoe Portlock. I enjoyed that conversation so much, and I learned so much, and I really hope that you have too. I want to remind you that we do have a GoFundMe set up for this podcast. We are 100% committed to accessibility here at The Wheelchair Activist, and we want to make sure that every bit of content is inclusive and accessible to all. Every donation allows us to continue doing this work, which includes captioning each and every episode and making it available on YouTube. Thank you so much to everyone who has donated so far and has allowed us to continue making this amazing podcast. Please give this podcast a share far and wide so everyone can enjoy the amazing content. This podcast has been hosted by me, Emma Vogelman, produced by me and Isabel Anderson, and edited by Joe Tapper. Thank you so much for listening, and I can't wait to see you in the next one.